I quite liked Cataclysm. Well, maybe it wasn't entirely down to the expansion itself, it was also a good time for me in real life as well, having started university fairly recently and having so much free time, or at least treating it as though I did. In any event, I played a massive amount of Cataclysm, and frankly, looking back, it surprises me that this was where Blizzard suffered their first drop in subscribers consistently during an expansion. Perhaps it wasn't all on Blizzard though. MOBAs were the new genre taking over the market, and League of Legends had been out for about a year by the time Cataclysm finally came out. What was surprising though is that even at the tail end of Wrath of the Lich King, there was basically no subscriber drop off, but Cataclysm itself didn't attract more players. It's often remarked how Wrath of the Lich King was the peak of World of Warcraft's sub count, but it was also the plateau in many regards, and a subscriber-based model usually goes up or down. No king rules forever, after all. Let's take a look into World of Warcraft's third expansion, The Sundering and the Rise and Fall of Deathwing. Just how did Cataclysm change World of Warcraft? Just like each expansion before, and spoiler, going forwards, the last patch is usually pretty long. Now for Wrath of the Lich King ICC, which was patch 3.3, was the 8th of December 2009. Ruby Sanctum patch 3.3.5 was the 22nd of June 2010. Cata's launch was the 7th of December 2010. A whole year had passed between the Lich King's downfall and the Sundering. As ever, hype was high for the new expansion. Wrath of the Lich King had been basically totally leaked prior to its launch, and maybe back then it had seemed like a nice little marketing trick possibly to get the hype going. In any event, there was a massive amount of information made public about Cataclysm in mid-August 2009. Here are a few of the points that had come out, including new race and class combos, new races themselves, the world revamp, the level cap being raised to 85 instead of 90. It's actually a wall of text about what's changing. This wall of text barely touches the surface in terms of content that we got with Cataclysm. Cata changed such a massive amount, you can't really understate it. In fact, I would say Cataclysm is the most ambitious expansion Blizzard has ever released so far. I can't even begin to imagine the sheer amount of work Cata took to put together. It had to deliver the new endgame progress, your standard expansion features, on top of remodeling and updating the vast majority of the Eastern Kingdoms and Kalimdor, redesigning literally thousands of quests anew. The old zones also had to fit flying in them, as well as make sense for everything that had happened in World of Warcraft up to now. Comparing this to creating a new continent from the ground up, well, it seems like a pretty enormous amount of work. And the reason behind this reshaping of the world was pinned to the new bad guy. Once again, Blizzard were going with a Lich King type of approach to the expansion, but a big bad guy we can focus on from the start to the very end. Now Deathwing himself is pretty cool. He's a dragon, that's nice. He occasionally did a drive-by and set you on fire. Very cool. It's just a bit harder to fit him into frequent cutscenes like you could do with Arthas though. In fact, anything that came after Arthas was going to have a tough task of keeping up to the legacy of the Lich King. Also, the legacy that Deathwing left was less well received than that of Arthas, but we're going to have to save that for when we start talking about raids. Let's talk about the big thing though, the entire world revamped and reshaped. This did two things which, despite the new world looking great and being functionally fantastic, would often be seen as a negative. Number one, taking away the nostalgia of certain old quests, removing NPCs, just changing the zones forever. Mankrik found his wife, old Blanchy the horse in Westfall was gone, as is the Danga in Ungoro Crater. It was a reminder that the game was moving on with its players, and that for your characters, well, things weren't going to be just how you remembered them this time around. We had North and South Barrens, the Cape of Stranglethorn and Southern Stranglethorn, Desolus becoming way less desolate, Thousand Needles was flooded, Oberdeen being changed up considerably. Basically everything you see in the initial cutscene with Deathwing transpires in game. Blizzard even decided to leave the park in Stormwind completely destroyed for a good few expansions, I think it was. The Stonemasons Guild must have been reluctant to work for some reason, I guess. And as I say, they may look great, they may play great, but it's a change, and you know how many people feel about that word these days. The second thing the world revamp did is focus a massive amount of resources into content quite a few players wouldn't see for some time, because the expansions release with new races, not with new classes, and new races are a bit less compelling to level than classes for many people. And for others, they're just playing WoW for the endgame content rather than looking at leveling something else. So this would have been a huge labour that potentially could have gone underappreciated for a large majority of the player base. Even still, I think the majority of questing in Cataclysm was well done enough. The main addition it brought in terms of quests was that auto-update as you progress through them, without needing to go and revisit the quest giver constantly. This feature was especially made use of in dungeons to get multiple quest steps all done in one go, adding up nicely to your XP. And much like Wrath of the Lich King, Cata's zone quests were story driven, with an end zone meta achievement, and ended off with dungeon quests. These zones were also varied and interesting. I particularly liked Uldum and Deepholm. Blizzard once again giving us a choice of starting zone, those being Mount Hyjal or Vashj'ir. Ah yes, Vashj'ir, the underwater zone. It's only ever been tried once, and I kinda doubt it's ever gonna happen again. There was so much grief about this place even before the expansion released, and on top of that it was optional and didn't even have any reputation items that you really needed from it. People kicked off about it all the same though, and I chose this zone to start my first time around in Cataclysm because it's an underwater zone. Do I want to try that? Yeah, sure. How was it though? Well, I don't remember anything too bad, apart from the thought that a shark is just going to appear below and eat you, which kind of terrified me throughout the whole zone. Other than that, I thought it was solid enough. Would I want another underwater zone? Sure I guess. Maybe just make it optional again though. Another big feature of Cata was to make Eastern Kingdoms and Kalimdor compatible with flying. Once again, I imagine this is far more complicated and difficult than it sounds. All those textures, random empty areas and bits you left in because players were never intended to see them, all had to be tidied up. And this expansion only added 5 levels to the cap. It was clear Blizzard were noticing that the following formula they had been doing since vanilla was making things get a bit over the top numbers wise. Instead, Cataclysm aimed to bring World of Warcraft into a more modern phase. Instead of it just creating many entirely new things, it added and built upon what we already had to better fit the game and just make it make a little bit more sense. And with the changes to the world, Blizzard added 2 new races, Worgen for the Alliance and Goblin for the Horde, sticking with the theme that would go on for some time, in that one expansion gives us new races and the next gives us a new class. And with these new races came a whole host of race-class combinations that were new, giving people a bit more incentive to go out and level with another character through revamped Azeroth, or just pay some money and have it done that way. We had the likes of Gnome Priests, Tauren Paladins, Hunters for Undead and Humans. There was a long list of additions as you can see here. And Blizzard made considerable changes to many classes, and I mean considerable. Paladins gained Holy Power as a new builder spender type. Hunters now have focus instead of mana, just like how their pets have had since vanilla. You no longer needed to carry ammo around as a hunter. Soul Shards were also done away with for Warlocks. You didn't need to carry them around anymore, and they were just linked to your character as an in-combat resource. Druids got their Eclipse mechanic for the first time. Spells no longer had ranks and leveled up with you. Warlocks got Dark Intent, leading to every caster trying to be a lock's best friend. Periodic effects could now critically strike and scale better with haste. The aggressive pet stance was removed and replaced with pet assist. Blizzard squished the number of talents we had from 71 in Wrath of the Lich King down to 41, with you gaining 1 point mostly every 2 levels, and the way that you chose your talents was changed as well. Now once you pick your talent tree, that's it. You have to spec at least 31 points into that tree before you can start putting points into another. This stopped there being as much variation in what players could pick and choose, which I think a lot of people actually missed overall. The talent trees themselves were still good, and Blizzard had made an effort to remove a lot of the very basic talents that just gave you a bit more crit or a bit more damage, but it did sort of lock you into that one spec quite a bit, and actually picking a specialization itself gave you massive bonuses, as well as a new stat. World of Warcraft underwent the largest change to stats ever. Attack power was gone, spell power was gone. Now your main stats, strength, intellect or agility, give those stats instead. Mana per 5, block, defense, weapon skill, all gone, no replacement. Stats that you cap like crit or hit now grow with each tier as they get more powerful. Reforging was introduced. 40% of a secondary stat on any item can be transformed into a different secondary stat, and I really like reforging. I was kind of sad when they got rid of it. Mastery was the entirely new stat for the expansion. It adds an extra effect for your specialization. The idea was, in a more exciting way, to replicate those talents that have been lost that just added flat stats like crit or damage. So if we look at a mage talent tree for example, and all of what I just said there, we can see picking Arcane gives me a big flat boost to Arcane damage, as well as the Mastery Mana Adept, which further increases my damage. So I'll pick this and go down the tree until I've spent 31 points. which is when you can see the other 2 trees unlock, and I have 10 points left to spend wherever I want to from this point onwards. Blizzard also tried to make mana and threat matter a bit more again. By the end of Wrath of the Lich King, you could happily spam away and pretty much never go out of mana, and tanks were aggro magnets. And well, it did matter a little bit more early on in the expansion at least. Gear inflation was starting to become more and more of a thing as the expansions went on into later phases, and Cataclysm was no exception to that. We also got a new profession, and for the first time not a primary profession either, it was a secondary, archaeology, and I can say I've never capped archaeology in any expansion. Not the biggest fan of it, to be honest, but then again, Blizzard had this habit of putting really cool stuff behind this profession. Zimrock the Destroyer, mounts, pets, toys that change your appearance, but just can't get to grips with a profession. It's kind of like fishing for me. I do 10 minutes of it, suddenly I have an overwhelming desire to do literally anything else, and these days I believe it takes a lot less time overall, but back then capping archaeology was a real effort. We also had a new progression system for guilds. This was Blizzard's attempt to encourage more players to join up with a guild to get the benefits they offer, and the amount of benefits from being in a max level guild was enormous. Your guild leveled up by earning XP, much like players, do raids, dungeons, battlegrounds, quests, basically anything in the game, and as it leveled up, all of its members gained benefits, 10% extra reputation, more honour, more justice points, more gold, heirlooms, pets, mounts, everything really. In Cataclysm, you really wanted to be part of a guild, any guild in fact, and the benefits guilds offered were probably a bit over the top really. In fact, it led to some pretty negative stuff eventually, which some of you may remember, and we'll come to talk about that in our criticisms of Cataclysm. It also introduced mass resurrection for the first time ever, which is now baseline for all healers in retail. I really like mass resurrection. Resurrecting people isn't particularly interesting for anyone, unless you need to go AFK for a few minutes I guess. The guild talent tree also had mass summon. This is probably one of the most insane spells ever to have been put in the game. Honestly, it was kind of hilarious to see. You could say it was negative and yeah, it was over the top. It was removed, but man, it was fun to use back then. The actual name of it was Have Group Will Travel. It needed a max level guild and summoned all party and raid members to your location. The scope of trolling with this spell was absolutely glorious. Dropping a whole raid into whirlpools or off ledges when done at a certain angle. Want to raid a capital city? Fly over there, stealth up somewhere, and then summon 39 other people to your location in a few seconds. How many of you guys got the Black Warbear from defeating the faction leaders during Cataclysm? I'm pretty sure I did. This spell was removed at the start of Mr. Pandaria, and honestly, I'm surprised it lasted that long. Perhaps needing a max level guild was a high enough barrier to entry though. And some of you attentive viewers may earlier have noticed something called Path of the Titans. Doesn't sound too familiar, does it? Well, maybe the name rings a slight bell, but what was it all about? The idea was for it to be an endgame level progression system to be tied in with the new profession, archaeology. You pick a path linked to a certain titan, and doing activities in-game progresses you and earns you new unlocked rewards, with 10 of them total. These will be focused around improving your character's output, being offensively, defensively, or for better healing throughput. In fact, looking at it now, it sounds oddly familiar to the Covenant system in Shadowlands. Anyway, the developers ended up scrapping it because it was deemed to be too similar to the glyph system that was already in place from Inscription, which in Cataclysm still provided very big benefits, not just the cosmetic effects that they do today. Also, it kind of sounds like you needed to do archaeology to progress it from what I've read up on it, so in a way I'm kind of glad I didn't have to do that. Well, we still have plenty of things to go over for Cataclysm. It seems like the more I do these videos, the more I find that I want to talk about, and I'm going to end this one here and talk about the remaining topics in part 2, which will be mainly around PvE, be it dungeon raids, PvP, more expansion features, and the negative parts of the expansion. So let me know what you guys think so far, and I will see you in part 2, where we continue to look at how Cataclysm changed World of Warcraft. If you like what you see, give the video a like and subscribe, as there's plenty more to come. As always, thank you all so much for watching. Take care. Bye.